A new report published this week is claiming that Fox News viewers can be, quote, deprogrammed. According to the field study, select Fox News viewers were less likely to buy into so-called, quote, fake news after watching Rising for 30 days.
That's not what it says on the teleprompter. It says CNN. So the research experiment paid several hundred audience members of the right-wing outlet to participate. They had to watch 7 hours of CNN weekly during September 2020. Maybe we should say reprogramming instead of deprogramming. It only took 3 days for participants' attitudes to shift. The authors of the study found, quote, large effects on attitudes and policy preferences about COVID-19. Uh-oh. I'm most in Fox's camp on COVID stuff. We also found changes in evaluations of Donald Trump and Republican candidates and elected officials. That might be healthy. Pamela, Denise Long, and Max Alvarez here to discuss with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Good morning.
So, Denise, what do you make of this? So I think it's not surprising that people, would have somewhat a different take on the news or ideas if they diversified, what news they were consuming a little bit. I think that's a healthy exercise that everyone should engage in. I would encourage people to do it. I think it's healthy to get your news from multiple sources, or just get all your news from Rising.
Right, from both me and Robbie.
Yes,
and Kim.
And Kim and all of our wonderful guests. So yeah, but the idea that people only have bad ideas if they watch Fox, and then we need to give them CNN so they have good ideas, that rings a little hollow to me. I don't know. What do you think?
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate your wording of reprogramming. And I agree, a smart person, a person who wants to understand an issue in a nuanced way from nuanced perspectives, would diversify their consumption of media. I think when you exist in an echo chamber, what you hear is a reiteration of what you already hear inside your head. You might be surprised to know that at one point I was an avid Fox viewer. And even now I continue to listen to folks on occasion, depending on what they're talking about, like Tucker Carlson, occasionally Laura Ingraham, because understanding their perspective and their commentary, which is a lot of what Fox is, right? It's people's take on the issues. Their commentary can be interesting to understanding just how folks are seeing issues and the questions if you're having dialogue with people who don't believe as you do, which I also think is a healthy thing to do. Uncommon, but healthy.
Yeah, Max, multiple perspectives, I think, are really important. But I read an interesting quote the other day from I think it was the New Zealand Prime Minister. They asked her, why is it that you don't have, angry older white men kind of spinning with rage in New Zealand in the way that you do in the UK, in the US, in Australia? And I think they were trying to get at, is there something about the kind of the social contract, or something about the social democracy? Is there some type of programming? Like, are people better off materially? And instead she said, because we never let Rupert Murdoch set up shop here. And she wasn't joking, like that there is something about the Murdoch media empire that stokes anger and produces a thing in a way until it becomes a real part of our material society. Do you think that she's overplaying that, or do you think there might be something to that?
I mean, I definitely think there's something to that. I mean, I think that, Murdoch has been a net negative on humanity. I feel like that is like as objective as I can be as someone who was raised on Fox News, right? Let's not forget, as I've mentioned a million times on this show, I was raised very Catholic, very conservative. We had Fox News on all the time. I was also in Southern California growing up. We were in the car most of the time. So my folks were listening to right-wing talk radio, like Rush Limbaugh, like Dennis Prager, like Larry Elder, like Dr. Laura Schlesinger, right? These were the voices of my childhood. And I very much recognize the ways that they are both incredibly comforting. They are ideologically supportive of people who already feel a certain way. And they do a very good job at turning their quote unquote opponents, which is your neighbors, your coworkers, your fellow parishioners. This is what Fox's main objective is to pit working people against one another and see their neighbors as the enemies, and not direct their ire at the people at the top who are screwing all of us over. But I'll save that, for another day. But I do recall the kind of impact that it has consuming this stuff day in and day out. I also, as a former, college teacher, very much championed the benefit of seeing different perspectives. We talk about that like it's a good in and of itself. In a way it is, right? Because it just forces you to see a little bit outside of your own head, when right now the media ecology that we live in is going in the opposite direction, like with the change. And you can see it. You can see the changes to Twitter and Facebook's algorithm. The second you like a post, immediately your feed updates and it says, oh, because you like this, you might like this. So it is very much conditioning us to be path dependent on our existing likes and tastes, and it is closing off our vision to the rest of the world and people who think differently. But the one thing I wanted to say as a former media historian, like you guys can probably see up on this side, right? I have a shelves full of books about media history because this is what I used to study back in academia. So I want to just note two things for viewers and listeners, and then I'll shut up, because there are material and policy based decisions in our history that have helped create this massively unhealthy media ecosystem that we have today. A lot of people tend to point to Ronald Reagan and the FCC repealing the quote unquote fairness doctrine in 1987 as the thing that gave rise to Fox News. There's actually a problem with that interpretation because the fairness doctrine applied to broadcast. It did not apply to cable, and also Fox News wasn't launched until 1996. But what repealing the fairness doctrine did was it was a boom to conservative talk radio. And so people like Rush Limbaugh very much helped create the market that Fox then capitalized on later in the 90s. What really set things off was Bill Clinton pushing through the Telecommunications Act of 1996 on the neoliberal premise that more market competition was going to create a healthier media environment. What it did, in fact, and we can see this 20-something years later, is it supercharged media consolidation. Now, about 90% of media companies media operations are owned by just 6 companies, and we see these insanely massive mergers, like Amazon buying MGM recently for $8.5 billion, and before that, Disney bought 21st Century Fox for $71 billion. Sinclair is buying up local news stations all over the place. It's that sort of concentration that on the macro level that is, again, impeding our ability to see beyond these sort of curated perspectives that these massive profit-making companies are allowing us to see. Okay, end of speech.
Denise, so the issue I have with what Max was saying at the beginning of what he was saying, if you have to, though, say the Prime Minister of New Zealand saying, yeah, we kept Murdoch out, well, I mean, that goes to a thing that we do differently in this country, right? The government can't say, no, we're saying no to this media property because we don't agree with it or we don't like it. What's that?
Used to before, in a way.
Right, but would we all agree we shouldn't do that? When we don't all agree, that's how the law is. I agree that we shouldn't do that. I think if you have to silence it or you have to censor it, that's malicious kind of in its own right, and you might be censoring or silencing something that has some value. I don't agree with everything said on Fox. I don't agree with all of its hosts. I agree with some of what they have to say about education issues, about how the pandemic was handled by liberal public health authorities. Certainly, I probably agree with them more than I agree with CNN or other places that I'm also happy to go on, despite criticizing them, and have been in conversations with people there. So what do you think about this?
I think there's an underlying value here that I'm hearing. Like, you have a desire, a drive to critically assess your understanding of things. And generally speaking, humans want validation of their beliefs and what they currently are thinking. And in my experience of being an avid Fox viewer at the time, is that it does create a sense of angst and anger with the commentary that is provided, and it is directed outward at you're seeing people who have a divergent perspective as your opponents, and not folks that you should be dialoguing with, but folks that you should be battling ideologically, politically, and the like. So I would wonder if folks on CNN were paid to watch Fox, what the reverse results of this research would be.
And if the academics are watching, I would love a study of Rising.
Oh yeah, we should have them watch Rising instead.
Absolutely.
Find out they come away better educated about a multiplicity of perspectives, and they're happier, they're sleeping better at night, they're making more money, their wildest dreams are coming true. That's what I think they'd find.
I think that's probably right. That's a hypothesis. Let's test it. Max and Denise, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for the diversity of thought.
There you go. We'll have more Rising right after this.
More attractive, doing